While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Franke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Discussing the ever-expanding threat landscape is something we do a lot on Security Breach, but today we're going to dedicate an entire episode to topics that include zero-day vulnerabilities, nation-state threats, phishing schemes, ransomware, and of course, the role artificial intelligence continues to play in making the good guys smarter and the bad guys tougher to pin down. But we're not going to dwell on just the doom and gloom. We'll also touch on the growing number of solutions and strategies that can help ensure your OT environment is as secure as possible. To help guide us on this journey, we'll first hear from Chad LeMaire at ExtraHop, followed by Chet Wisniewski at Sophos. First up, discussing those frustrating legacy and human-based vulnerabilities, ransomware, and deepfakes, is Chad LeMaire. You know, and one of those things that we're always responding to, and we talk about the response part, are these ongoing, just this massive vulnerabilities that we're always finding throughout the ICS. They seem to be growing all the time. A lot of different stuff popping up. Are there things in particular that are sort of lighting up your radar right now in terms of the different types of vulnerabilities we should be dealing with first, or that could be the most concerning down the road?
I think, and by the way, this also applies to non-OT systems.
Sure.
But poor network segmentation, right? As you look at, I don't necessarily like the term zero trust. I prefer the term, validated trust, right? Continual validated trust. But one of the concepts within that is network segmentation. And when it comes to OT, in my mind, it's probably even more important than your standard IT networks that are out there. And so that you can actually have better security to protect those critical assets. So I would throw out poor network segmentation as one of them. We've already discussed part of the issue OT companies are dealing with is those legacy systems. And they weren't built with security in mind, right? And they lack, even if they have it, they lack modern security features that really should be implemented within those networks. Let me talk about now some I'll say infrastructure related threats or vulnerabilities, if you will. We touched a little bit on the insider threat. And just to be clear, an insider doesn't have to be malicious, right? It could be accidental or unintentional. But human error is a big part of most breaches. And so, I didn't necessarily approach the unintentional part at first as an insider threat, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it really is. It's just not a malicious threat, but it's a threat nonetheless. And then because we have all these issues with our networks, we're seeing a rise in ransomware out there. We had 38% of manufacturing, construction, and utility respondents tell us in 2024 that ransomware poses a big risk to their organization. And within that same report, the respondents average over 5 ransomware events in the last 12 months at an average cost of $1.3 million. And so OT security must get modernized if we're going to stop this kind of activity.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we throw out a lot of those numbers, and I do think they're starting to hit home in terms of opening people's eyes and making them more aware. Now we're getting down to tactics in terms of the right tactics, and those can be really unique for every organization, for every enterprise, depending on their sort of their operating environment. And I bring that up because we talk about segmentation a fair amount. And I don't think there's anybody out there who'd say, no, I don't want it. It doesn't work. It isn't necessary. The problem is implementing that segmentation strategy, because I think it can become extremely daunting once you start digging into it. How do we cut it off? Where do we cut it off? How many endpoints should there be? Could you offer some advice there, Chad, in terms of, let's not try to eat the elephant, but where do you start? What's a good place to start?
Yeah, I'll relay a project from my time in the military for this. So we were looking at, initially we were looking at just upgrading a network, but the more we kind of looked at the architecture, we made a decision that there needs to be a wholesale new start on this network. And so we took a look at the DoD has published a zero trust document. And so we looked at, there's roughly 153 zero trust principles and concepts ranging from beginning to advanced. And we looked at that and said, which of these apply to the network that we are architecting? And I think that's the first step. Don't just look and say, hey, there's 153 principles here. Let's go and implement them. No, the question is, which of those actually apply? And we realized that 123 of them applied. So, roughly 30 of them did not apply to what we were doing, didn't need to go look at implementing that. And then we started looking at, okay, as we architect this, which of these can we afford, right? And so you have to prioritize those principles and concepts. And what we realized is we could do 111. Remember, I told you we identified roughly 123. So we had about 12 of them that were would have put the cost of it to be more than what we had. And so what we then had to do was look at other compensating controls to account for, and mitigations to account for us not doing those last 12. And I think that approach applies to any organization out there, right? Take a look at what's needed, prioritize those needs, get what you can, mitigate or have compensating controls for the others.
No, I think that is a great place to jump off. And I'm glad you brought up the economic element of it. That's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that. I think a lot of times, especially in manufacturing, where we're so focused on quality and customer service, that we feel like, well, price can't be as big a factor as maybe the reality of it is. It's okay to take that into consideration as well. I think that's a great point.
And I think it must be taken into consideration.
Absolutely. So looking at some of the other things that you were talking about there, you've mentioned a couple of times about bringing different teams together, IT, OT, the C-level, supply chain. There's a lot of different players involved here. I know there's no silver bullet here. You'd be making more money than either of us could imagine if you knew exactly how to do this. But what have you seen as effective in getting those folks to come together, work together, and not have this like turf battle? It's either a turf battle of who's in charge, or nobody wants to take responsibility for a lot of OT security stuff. What have you seen as the best practices in terms of getting folks together in the appropriate way?
Yeah, for me, companies need to appoint someone to be responsible for risk management of the OT network. And then that point of contact needs to meet with each of the departments monthly. And even for us, I meet with certain departments every month, and then we come together as a risk management committee every month. And so we talk through all the risk that we have, any changes to the risk, any new risk that may have been identified, and we work it collectively. And that's where I go back to my previous comment about relationships matter. And it's not just relationships and knowing one another, it's relationships and working together on committees. And so that would be my recommendation for companies out there. Appoint someone to be the primary point of contact, and then have them work with each department and bring the departments together at a minimum monthly to discuss any risk. You can apply that for any process. It doesn't have to be the risk. If you're architecting a network, we got to keep the business needs first. And so if I'm architecting that network, it should be to get after the requirements, right? The OKRs of that business, in order to be as effective as you can be.
No, makes sense. So I can't believe we've had a conversation going this long about cybersecurity and we haven't talked about artificial intelligence yet. So I'm going to ruin all that and bring AI up. And, just Chad, what are some of your thoughts in terms of where AI is at? Is it more helpful? We know the bad guys are using it. We know there's tools out there to help the good guys as well. Where do you think the bigger impact could be had? And I guess maybe some of your general thoughts on how it's being implemented.
Yeah, let me start with something not related to AI, and then I'll get into it. I'll apply it to AI.
Sure.
So Colonel John Boyd came up with this concept called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act. And within the military, the goal of that, your goal is to shrink that OODA loop, right? Make it as tight as possible so you get to your act portion before the adversary does. I relate that same thing when it comes to cyber defense. How do we shrink our OODA loop? And one of the things that's, in essence, thrown a wrench into it is AI. And before I continue, let me say, there really isn't a such thing as bad AI or good AI. It's AI used for bad purposes or good purposes. So if you hear me say good or bad AI, realize that that's what I truly mean with it. But what we're seeing, and I just came from Black Hat. I went to one of the presentations about AI in the SOC, and this topic of AI came out, and I'll tell you, it's the same. I was a little surprised with that. Well, let me rephrase. I was a little surprised we weren't further along with implementing AI than we are. However, I have seen some articles that really caution against it because there have been companies who have gone forward with implementing AI and didn't truly do a proper security review before, and they're undoing what they did. And so I go back to, it needs to be a deliberate approach. But what we're seeing is threat actors are taking advantage of AI, right? Social engineering campaigns are becoming better because of AI. And where I think it's going to get really sticky is with agentic AI. As soon as we start seeing threat actors employing AI agents, the purpose of that can be to shrink that OODA loop. But we also saw with the testimony of General Nakasone, Director Easterly, and others to a subcommittee that sometimes it may not even be about shrinking the OODA loop. It may be about actually expanding the orientation phase, right? Because what they had noticed is there were threat actors getting into critical infrastructure that were just lying dormant, observing, waiting to strike at a time of their choosing. What concerns me is I think to the future of these AI agents, and they start getting smarter and realizing there's this vulnerability that I don't currently have the ability to do, but let me just reach back. Let me create another AI agent that can get after that vulnerability. I start worrying about how we as defenders can deal with it. One of the things, though, during this talk I mentioned during Black Hat is one of the ways for defenders that we can, if we use AI properly, we can take what would have been a multi-day incident and have it become a 1-hour incident. And so what I kind of posit to some extent is for us to be successful as defenders in an AI-enabled age, we're going to have to develop capabilities that are used for good purposes, but think like bad AI. Yeah. Because what I'll use as an example, AlphaGo, I believe it was Move 37, right? It was an AI program to see if computers can beat humans in Go. Move 37 was so out there that everybody thought it was a mistake. And it wasn't. It was actually a calculated move by the AI that no human would have ever done. And so applying that to AI that is used for bad purposes to get after vulnerabilities, we know right now how we approach defending AI because we've been defending it against humans. How do we account for AI thinking differently, though? And I think that's the challenge for us. And that's where I say we need to take AI used for good purposes, but have it think like bad AI if we're truly going to be able to defend, so we can identify that AlphaGo Move 37, right, from a cybersecurity perspective.
Wow, interesting perspective for sure. Taking AI back a little bit to some things we were talking about before in the best applications, because you're right, some folks are plugging it in and they don't really understand the best use for it. Do you see AI having a bigger impact on the detection part or on the response part? Because we do see in the ICS especially a lot of those live off the land or dwelling types of attacks where detection is so important. But as we just mentioned, response is a bigger part of the issue too. So is there an area you could see it having a bigger impact?
I'm going to answer that question with, is it A or B, with yes. And what I mean by that is, clearly you're going to need AI in the detection piece. I think the challenge for companies is going to be, within the military, we have this thing we call pre-approved actions, right? And we're starting to see that with AI agents, right? Autonomous thinking and decision making. You could start building some of that in. The question we need to come to an answer is, how much autonomy are we going to give the AI agents that are helping with defense? And so, yes, I see it absolutely helping with response, but we also need to figure out what those guardrails are when it comes to having AI assist us with that response.
Absolutely. No, that makes sense. Chad, this has been great. Talked about a lot of interesting stuff here. As we look ahead, this is the question that I kind of close up a lot of these conversations with. What do you see as some of the big things having the biggest impact down the road if we look a year and a half away?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about the things I'm going to mention for this throughout this conversation, and maybe it'll serve as somewhat of a summary for this. But I think we're going to see threat actors trying to tighten the OODA loop. And so as defenders, we need to also tighten our OODA loop. We're going to see AI use by threat actors expand. We've already seen it expanding. My concern is, how cheaply, if you will, threat actors can purchase these things on the black market compared to the expense that it costs to implement as a defender. And so I look forward to the time where AI-enabled defense capabilities don't carry the price tag that some of them do currently today, because we need them as defenders. We need to keep our eyes out. Ransomware keeps on increasing. We just saw there was a this is actually related to social engineering, which is my next point, really. We just saw that there was a social engineering effort, and I would call it a campaign. And that's where I think this is the trend. We've gone from threat actors kind of having these singular lines of effort and what they're doing to now having a campaign to go after companies. And so social engineering is getting more and more capable from threat actors. And so we need to be prepared to respond to those types of new social engineering campaigns that are out there, because the initial call isn't to actually get into your data, right? It's to kind of gather the intel and information for an attack at a later point. And I think what we initially saw with social engineering, right, was almost an immediate implementation of using the information they gathered. Now it's a more calculated campaign that they can wait to then go and implement. They're also looking at different ways. This one in particular was they were looking to get after your network through CRMs. And so they wanted to gather, right? They wanted to imitate IT and HR departments to gather some information so that later they could use your CRM in order to affect the attack. And so we just need to keep we need to keep monitoring for those threats as they evolve so that we can evolve with them.
No, I think it's a great point on the social engineering. They're becoming a lot more surgical and looking at not even data points, but behaviors or patterns that they can pick up to then try to help impersonate you or make that phishing email sound that much more precise in going after somebody else. So
yeah, and to your point, right? Deepfakes keep getting better and better. There's now a booming industry for deepfake identification, right? A lot of companies are starting to form that are looking to address that problem. And that's the other thing, not to inject a new term, but I think if you look at what's been described as the J curve, right, typically used in a lot of finance markets, I think we've completed that under loop of that J, and we're starting to go into the exponential growth when it comes to these types of capabilities out there. And, sorry to introduce a new term, but when it comes to, I want to apply the J curve to AI. When it
Okay.
comes to AI, we're beyond that, the under curve of the J, and we're going into exponential growth. And I'll give you a good example when it comes to deepfakes. Just last year, we saw, I think most of us are familiar with, the employee that got duped, thought she was on a video call with the CFO and a couple of other employees of the company. That kind of worked because there was a script there. And I think had the employee tried to interject some things, it might not have gone so well. But we're beyond that now. Now we're seeing real-time injection of the video, and we're seeing real-time injection of the speech. And so we are now in exponential growth of AI and implementing. And that's where I go back to, we need defenders to be doing the same when it comes to defensive capabilities for AI.
No, absolutely. It just gets more and more complex. The bad guys are evolving very quickly. Thanks, Chad. And now let's hear from Chet as he dives into patch management, supply chain defenses, and social engineering plays. Chet, another thing I thought was really interesting when we were talking out in San Francisco is you mentioned how the bad guys, they're using good stuff in bad combinations and creating trouble and creating havoc that way. I'd really love for you to dive into that again and share with our audience what you mean by that.
Sure. Well, the term we've used in the industry for a long time is living off the land, using existing things that are already there. And just that, in the early days, living off the land was often used as a way to then import your malicious tooling into the compromised network. And we're really moving to the point where a lot of times the criminals are never bringing along any malicious tooling anymore. They're just using things that are either built into the operating systems themselves. As we see Linux and Mac getting compromised more and more often, almost always on those platforms, there's already a very powerful language like Python or installed on those machines that allow you to kind of craft your malicious things right on the machines that have been compromised themselves. And of course, on Windows, we see that same behavior with PowerShell. And PowerShell is so common at this point. I would say nearly every breach that we investigate has some sort of PowerShell involved in it because it's on every Windows platform, and it's such a powerful language to craft malicious tools in. But in addition to that, of course, we see the abuse of admin tools and more often remote management tools, right? So no matter what kind of, in the old days, everybody, of course, had RDP. A lot of organizations have moved away from RDP and into commercial remote management tools. But almost everybody has some sort of remote management tool installed. And the criminals more and more often, rather than bringing their own, are compromising an admin account and using the one you've already put in place. So there's fewer indicators for you to notice something malicious is happening because they're just using what's already there in a pattern that's slightly different than perhaps your normal pattern. That's all.
Yeah. The credential harvesting and use of those admin accounts, it's sort of a separate conversation. Maybe we can circle back to that. But I'd like to talk a little bit more about these sort of ingrained vulnerabilities that we're dealing with and we're seeing more and more of all the time, especially even in the Microsoft suite, which is what a lot of manufacturers are using. When it comes to these things, there's the thought of, well, we need to get better at our patch management, or we need to get better at sort of developing workarounds or not using certain parts of these platforms, these services, these networks. What is your approach there in terms of, is it about being better at patching? Is it about being better at identifying these vulnerabilities ahead of time? What do you think is the proper strategy there?
Yeah, I guess there's a couple different pieces to that. I mean, certainly at a high level, it's just about patching, right? I mean, when we're talking broadly across the board, it's about being better at patching, and patching's harder than it sounds. I mean, everybody makes fun of people like, how come you didn't patch? It's actually, considering the volume of things that need to be patched and trying to determine the true risk levels of prioritizing which things really ought to be at the top of that stack. It's a lot harder than it looks in a large and complicated environment. So, let's give people a break. Patching's hard. Patching your home computer is easy. Patching work is hard. Right. And when we're looking at it, I think that's the important part here, is identifying the high priority things and getting them out first. And 0 days aren't the real problem here. Most of the time, It's very rare for most organizations to ever experience a true zero-day attack in their network. You do have a little bit of breathing room, but the breathing room you have is often days. I mean, as we're recording, there was recently a SharePoint vulnerability that was a zero-day. Microsoft, of course, addressed it very quickly. Most organizations weren't impacted while it was a zero-day, but you only had hours to prioritize getting that fix out there before you might be compromised if that was exposed to the internet. So that's, key point one on patching. Anything facing the internet, you've got hours. And especially when we're looking at remote access tools, whether that's your remote management tool, your VPN, your firewall, that kind of stuff. Those have been massive targets the last couple of years and a primary vector for how organizations are compromised. So you really got to prioritize those things first. And, if you've been doing this for a while, your instinct is to think about it really that big of a problem anymore. Like you really need to focus on those internet facing remote access and servers. And then when you're talking about Windows itself, it inherently, as we just discussed with PowerShell and other things, has a lot of things there that can be abused. RDP, PowerShell are frequently abused in attacks. So when you're looking at servers versus endpoints, those servers really ought to be hardened and locked down more than they are out of the box, right? Most of the time, you don't need PowerShell on your servers. You may actually use it to manage your endpoints, but you're probably not doing that on the servers. So thinking about how you can create a pared down installation of Windows for more critical operating environments where just the necessary things are there. And perhaps if you do use RDP to manage a server, locking it down so it can only be managed from a small number of management IP addresses might limit exposure for abuse when you're in the early stages of an attack.
Yeah. It's interesting. Usually we're used to, when we're talking about software in the industrial sector, it's, hey, the more bells and whistles, the better. I'll figure out how I'm going to use it later. But now we've got these security concerns that really make us have to look more closely at all these different connection points to realize who really needs it. Do any of us really need it? Because it is potentially a source of entry for the bad guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as tech people, we like to have lots of options to do things different ways.
Yeah.
But it's a huge vulnerability to actually do so. And the more lockdown you can, especially for the critical infrastructure, right? I mean, It's hard to do this stuff on end computers. Users do lots of creative things, and we don't want to impact their productivity too much. But on the server side, I think before a device is deployed, it's appropriate to do an assessment, determine what network activity is expected, what connections are expected, and to limit things outside of that scope as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about segmentation and micro-segmentation all the time. This is almost a pre-segmentation type strategy, because you are, right from the start, hopefully, limiting the different pathways, I guess, for bad things to come in.
Yeah, and I mean the start is the key point. Like trying to do these, think of having these assessments as part of a standard deployment. I mean, depending on the size of an organization, there's going to be all kinds of different processes. But in many IT departments, it's like, oh, I need to request an IP address, a static IP address for this server asset, and there should be a whole checklist of things that you typically are going to do when you're rolling out a new service or a new server or a new piece of hardware. And as part of that process, including that security assessment there really puts you ahead of the game instead of trying to go back and do it later.
Chet, one of the things you mentioned was some of these phishing schemes that are sort of getting into the MFA software and platforms and services. Ransomware is huge in the industrial sector. It's a huge issue that we continue to deal with. Are there any particular tactics, bad actors out there that are kind of on your radar right now, or is it the same stuff we've always been dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things that are causing a lot of this havoc when it comes to the phishing side of stuff. I mean, it's all social, and the quality of it's gone up so much because of the availability of artificial intelligence to craft well-written, correct grammar. I mean, all the old tropes that we used to have around watching for emails that were suspicious and all this, nothing is suspicious anymore. So that's a problem, right? It's really hard for staff. We have to build the systems. We can't rely on our staff to detect that something's wrong necessarily. It's still good to raise awareness, though, about current threat vectors that staff may not be aware of. I think the two we're seeing most frequently right now are emails with QR codes asking you to scan the QR code to authenticate, because they're trying to get you off of your computer where all the security software is and onto your phone where you don't have the same layers of protection. Your phone's probably on a 5G network and not on a corporate managed Wi-Fi where it's going through some kind of firewall that can block websites that are dangerous, whereas your laptop may not be. So they're trying to get you where there's less security, and you're not going to scan the QR code with your laptop. You're going to grab your iPhone, right?
Right.
And so that tactic to raise awareness to staff that real emails are not going to ask you to use a QR code to then log into something. Unfortunately, that's contradictory to what I just said with passkeys, which often use QR codes for authentication. So I mean, like we're often not doing ourselves any favors here, but raising awareness about this stuff is helpful. The other one is an attack that's been coming quite widespread called ClickFix. And ClickFix pretends to be a CAPTCHA that you get in your web browser. It's like, hey, Cloudflare's needs to verify you're a human, and we're used to those boxes popping up all the time where we got to check the box or rotate the lamb to face the right direction or whatever we're supposed to do with the CAPTCHA. And what the criminals instead are doing is telling people to hit Windows R on their keyboard and paste a malicious command, a PowerShell command, into the computer directly. And unfortunately, that, to my surprise, is quite successful. Users are like, oh, I need to do this to prove I'm a human now. Like, I guess it's believable because we've had to do a lot. You know, we had to find the crosswalks, and we had to find the fire trucks, and we had to rotate the animals and put the puzzle pieces in place. We've had so many different things to prove that we're humans, that why not press this key on my keyboard and press Control V, and users are doing it. So when these new techniques come along, it is worth doing a brief training or a memo to our staff to go, hey, if you get a prompt like this, it's almost guaranteed to be something dangerous. Try not to do it. Remember, if you see something like this, report it to us. Let us know that somebody's targeted you this way. But we shouldn't rely on the users. We just need to build better security layers as much as possible to just, that proper multi-factor prevents a lot of things. If that person pastes that malicious thing, we talked about XDR at the beginning, hopefully you're going to be able to be seeing the obfuscate that this computer's executing obfuscated PowerShell script and intervene on that user's behalf to protect them against that threat if they're tricked into doing it.
Absolutely. Well, you talked about XDR. That's one of the things we know Sophos is working on. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the role that the company is playing in really supporting industrial cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, industrial cybersecurity is just the same as regular network cybersecurity, except probably most cases more outdated. I mean, we don't have a tendency to keep industrial systems on the bleeding edge the way we may our traditional IT environments, which makes them more vulnerable. And so I think there's more focus, and we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but I think more focus on network layer detection. Things like NDR are really important in OT environments because more unprotected devices makes it harder to get all the instrumentation you might have in an IT network. And my focus personally when I talk to organizations that have an OT presence is to focus on things like NDR and remote access, because I think they're the NDR is going to give you some of the best visibility into early detection that something is wrong, and remote access is the area where I think in OT networks just the security is generally not is present. The operators are more resistant to multi-factor and more I don't want to say addicted, but that was kind of the word that came to mind. More addicted to that remote access, right? Like you've got a sprawling physical plant that's usually way larger than an IT network has. And so the OT systems requiring availability, remote access to everything and at a moment's notice is often critical in those environments. And they're more resistant to that multi-factor friction. And I think that's certainly where I look to it. When I'm looking at products, I think NDR is probably one of the more impactful things to get, because anytime I look at a breach, I'm looking at the impact and the cost, and both of those things dramatically amplify with the number of hours that the attacker has been in the network. So the earliest possible detection is the key goal, and so when you don't have full EDR deployment on every device, I think network is your next best spot, firewalls and NDR.
No, it makes sense. And, remote access, I don't even know if I would use the word addicted. It's just become, again, just such contextually part of the operation. It's one of the things that when we looked at all this IoT technology and this next generation connectivity, we wanted all of this remote access. And now it's like, whoa, guys, you might be a little bit too plugged in. There may be some things that we need to scale back here because, as you've alluded to, that's where a lot of things start from a cybersecurity perspective in terms of folks getting into the network. So it's a real interesting challenge for the OT guys right now.
Yeah, one of the simplest things you mentioned certificates earlier, requiring that the device be a company-owned device that has a certificate installed in order to authenticate to that remote access. That alone provides an enormous amount of security with zero friction.
Yeah.
Other than I have to use the corporate laptop and I can't do it from, my own Chromebook. But I mean, I don't think that's an unreasonable
It,
request for most of us. And that alone means
yeah.
that even that stolen credential or that phishing attack is going to fail because they just can't log in unless they're on that device. Now they've got to compromise that endpoint that belongs to that OT worker
Yeah.
and then remote control it in order to get to the next remote control. And
Yeah.
it's back to buying you time to detect something's wrong. And I think that's
Yeah.
really key.
No, it can't be an issue anymore when we talk about sort of the wild west of these device connections to our OT assets. We do need some stricter guidelines there. We need to be a little more disciplined in what we're allowing to access our networks because it's just too easy otherwise. We're opening too many doors.
Yeah, I mean, I have to carry two laptops when I'm going to Black Hat in Las Vegas because I have to have the company one with the certificate on it, and I'm probably
Yeah.
not going to want to use that on some of the more malicious networks that I might want to play around with while I'm at the security conference. And so I'm
Yeah.
just going to be that guy pulling out two laptops at the airport conveyor belt because I need security and I need flexibility. So I have to take two.
We'll let it pass. No worries, Chet. You mentioned how a lot of these attacks, especially the phishing stuff, has gotten so much better, so much more refined. I think a big part of that, I think most people also would say AI is playing a huge role in allowing the hackers to make better emails. We're getting into deep fakes and a whole bunch of other stuff now that AI is doing for us. What's your take? Are we seeing more bad from artificial intelligence? Or are we seeing good stuff too? Because we're figuring out on the white hat side of things how to use it and leverage it as well.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects there. On the social side, it's all bad. The criminals are able to impersonate, as you say. I mean, audio deepfakes are trivial now. If you and I had talked 1 year ago, I was like a little skeptical, and I was like, oh, a year from now, this might be a problem. And unfortunately, I was right. We're to a point now where it's trivial to make an audio deepfake. Video deepfakes are still a little ways off from being realistic, but audio deepfakes are table stakes now. And so on the social side, we're definitely losing there because the lures are high quality. Even phone calls sound believable in many cases. If the criminals are targeting someone important enough that it's worth cloning their voice. But when we're looking at the technical side, I hear a lot of people worrying about people using AI to create malware or using AI to find vulnerabilities or that's just not happening. Like the criminals aren't sophisticated enough, the tools aren't good enough, and even, you look at the research that the best minds in the world in AI at Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and Meta, and they're like barely able to use these tools for those things, and they're spending billions of dollars on it. The criminals have no chance. Like all the good guy, all the smart things happening on the technical side are benefiting the good guys. And I think this is one of the few times the asymmetry is benefiting the defender rather than the attacker. When we look at how we can do AI automated SOCs and help automate triage at level one in a SOC to reduce the boring, redundant stuff that people have to do all day long with triaging threats and let them focus on actual threats after they've met a threshold is helping our mental health. It's helping our job satisfaction. It's improving the quality of what we're doing. Using AI to detect business email compromise, using like there when we focus on making small models to solve a specific problem, we can make very efficient use, unlike these large language models that we all like playing with and chat GPT and stuff. We can make small little models that do incredibly amazing work, but it requires a bit of knowledge and training to know how to do that. And the good guys have all the data scientists, the good guys have all the GPUs, the good guys have all the academic research at their fingertips to create and deploy these models to help us do security better. And the bad guys don't have access to a lot of that. And to be honest, they're not bothering because the old things they're doing are still working. If they can trick a human into inviting them in, they don't need to bypass all of our stuff and they don't need a vulnerability. And so they stick with what works. And I think at the moment, I feel AI heavily benefits defenders outside of the social engineering stuff that's a real risk to our end users. But I don't think we have a lot of good answers in that space yet, unfortunately, and that I don't think training users is going to help because there aren't any telltale signs, and it largely just lowers their productivity if they're worried about every link they're clicking. We give them a box that's designed to click links, and then we're like, be careful which ones you click. It's hard. It just doesn't
Yeah.
work. We have to build better tools, and we're all working on that. And I think overemphasizing prevention is bad as well. We have to accept in the mindset that we're only going to prevent 90%. So let's put a whole ton of effort into detecting the 10%. And if we can do that and shorten those windows, we'll be in pretty good shape.
Excellent. Well, Chet, I think you're the first person to offer a much brighter, more optimistic look at AI's role in cybersecurity. I think we're always trying to find that about how we can use it from a better defensive posture, but just always think we're chasing the bad guys. It's the first perspective we've had that flips that script a little bit.
Well, yeah, I could talk bad about AI as well.
No, we're good.
There's certainly risks it's going to introduce to our environment, but I don't think the bad guys are ever going to leverage it in the short term, at least, as well as we can leverage it. So we do have an advantage, and we should exploit that advantage.
Well said. Another big thing for manufacturers, and we've been talking about endpoints and securing all these endpoints and also with the logins, credentials, all those things. With manufacturers, it not only gets complicated on the plant floor, but also because they have a very diverse supply chain. So potentially because there's a lot of connectivity then with able to see what your suppliers are doing, what your logistics providers are doing, where things are in distribution and retail and everything else. There's a lot of inroads for hackers to take to come all the way back to the manufacturer. So there's a lot of communication that needs to take place. There's also a lot of trust that needs to be put in place. What advice could you offer to manufacturers in working with their supply chain to help them also be secure and not sort of proliferate the problem potentially?
Yeah, supply chain security is a bit of a nightmare. It's really hard, right? Because we can never truly assess the security of a supplier to us, and the tools we have are quite crude. We have certifications, we have regulations, we have certain things that we look to, but we've all seen how they can be gamed or how they fail or how they're measuring a point in time, and now we're 4 months later, and is that thing still true? Is that certification still valid? Are they still compliant? It's a really hard problem, and I'm not saying that organizations are intentionally trying to cheat or manipulate this stuff. It's a moving target, and that's really hard. One of the things that we use for authentication and authorization is OAuth. Well, we use it for authorization, which is to say which data should you have access to. And again, in the old days, we might have had extranets, or we might have provided VPN credentials to some of our partners to come into our networks and systems. We really need to move away from that toward that zero trust style thing of going, this supplier only needs to access this one tool, not our network. Right? Don't let them on the VPN. Provide them a gateway that's one tool that requires multi-factor for them to authenticate to. And that one tool, when they're in there, their authorization in OAuth only allows them to access the set of parameters that are appropriate for that supplier or that contractor who's placing a bid on a contract that we've got. And we've seen, high profile examples. I mean, if you remember it's probably been over 10 years now since that big Target exploit, and that was done through an extranet. It was, for contractors to come in and bid on projects. And unfortunately, it provided access to a much larger part of Target's network than was necessary, and that led to the big credit card breach. So, narrowing that access through zero trust and carefully crafted OAuth policies that say this is the subset of information you should have access to. Now, the new risk that's coming in this area is the bad thing about AI that I'm worried about, which is MCP, which is this interface to allow agentic AI to interact with systems to try to pull together information from multiple vendors in multiple places. And that's going to start playing a bigger and bigger role in supply chain security, because a lot of organizations are looking at how they could use AI to talk to 3 or 4 different suppliers and put together, have the AI kind of assemble information and take agentic automatic actions, tying all that supply chain together. And the potential for productivity there's enormous, which is why everybody's excited about it and starting to deploy it. But unfortunately, the security around these MCP servers is quite immature. At this point, they're just starting to even consider things like authorization as part of the protocol. So I would be hesitant and cautious to move forward too quickly adopting that technology. I think you should keep an eye on it if you're interested in it. It's certainly worth following, but the protocols and the maturity level is very low at the moment. It's a very new thing, and I think it needs a little more maturity before integrated it into your supply chain.
No, fair. Well said, though. I mean, just another thing to definitely keep an eye on in terms of things that can make us stronger, make us better moving forward. And that's the goal. Like you said before, we're not chasing perfection here. Focus on the 90% of the things you can do, and you'll be in pretty good shape.
Absolutely.
So this has been great, Chet. A lot of interesting stuff here. We talked about AI. We've talked about different endpoint security, credentials, all of that, protecting the logins. Any other big trends you're seeing coming down the road that we should be aware of?
Well, I think that the social side's not going to go away. Anytime in my history doing this for almost 30 years, wherever our weakest point is always the point that certainly criminals target. And obviously nation states have become quite adept at camouflaging themselves as criminals as well. So they're often doing the same thing, hoping you won't overreact and realize that you've been compromised by a foreign adversary. And the weakest point that's always going to be there is the human. And I think that we're going to continue to see human exploitation rise above most other things. You know, certainly if there's a vulnerability that's unpatched, somebody's going to come along and try to take advantage of it. But the determined attacker knows that the humans can't be patched. There's no new firmware for our brains that can fix our vulnerability to being tricked. And we get better and better at all kinds of areas of security that they have to keep moving on. And, you know, the web browser used to be where they targeted us because it was weak, and we fixed it. And then we didn't encrypt everything, and Ed Snowden told the world about it, and we went and encrypted everything. And now they can't, you know, see all of our plain text traffic anymore. And so we continually are strengthening our security posture on and on and on. And as we continue to do that, the one place we're going to remain weak is our human nature to believe other humans, want to help other humans, and be tricked into, unfortunately, helping the criminals on occasion. So I think most of my concerns and efforts are focused on the social side. And if you follow hacking news, you probably have heard of some of these groups like Scattered Spider or Lapsus. And that's their entire modus operandi. They're 17-year-old kids in the UK and America and Canada, Australia, wherever they're at, that are English language speaking and just calling up on the phone and resetting passwords with the tech support department. I mean, you don't even need to phish somebody. You just call up and impersonate Sarah or John or Ben, and away you go. So that is the place where I think I'm most concerned, and I'm putting a lot of my research efforts on how can we more reliably identify human beings that belong, not just when they're on their computer, but when they're on the telephone, when they're texting us, when they're on WhatsApp, all the different ways that we communicate to ensure that we're not just being tricked.
No. Well said. I mean, we just had Scattered Spider's been really hot in terms of the last couple of months, but Clorox recently came out and started blaming a third party for a lot of things that they dealt with, because it was a situation where Scattered Spider was essentially calling the help desk and doing just what you described there. So the impact's been pretty significant across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough when you outsource as well. I mean, like when those, and I'm not passing judgment on outsourcing, but I mean, it makes it even more challenging to often verify someone's identity, and that somebody within the organization, I can usually tell when I'm talking to a fellow staff member, because we're always talking about the same things that are going on inside the company, and there's a certain level of familiarity there that helps with identifying that even when it's somebody I don't know, they know too much about what's going on in such and such a team that I also know, that it's like, okay, I'm pretty sure that this person definitely works on that team. And when you in the Clorox case, I believe it was outsourced help desk, which meant that those outsourced folks don't have any idea what's going on inside. They're entirely reliant on their tools to verify that identity. And, moving to systems that I always think back to like movies in the 80s about bank robberies, where the bank would have the word of the day, and if a bank branch called another bank branch, they had to know the secret word. I think we've got to go back to that.
Yeah. Some of the old school stuff still works for sure. I mean, the hackers are still using a lot of old school tactics. Maybe we need to remember some analog approaches as well.
Yeah, I mean, if it solves 75% of our problem, I'll take it.
There you go. Great stuff, Chet. Thanks so much for coming on Security Breach. Really appreciate the time, man.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. Thanks to Chet and Chad for their insights, and thank you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or MBTMag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Chad and Chester, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.